Okay guys, hello and welcome back to the second video on Introduction to Python course. And first of all, my apologies, there was a bit of a delay in the first and the second video, and that's because I actually had a really bad throat in between and I could just not speak for at least 4 or 5 days, and that's why I could not record a single video. But well, we are here right now, and I hope that you have seen the first video, and if you have any doubts or queries, you can always put it down in the chat, or you can always drop me an email as well. I'll put my email in this in the description below. Now today is not going to be a very long video. We're going to keep it a bit short, and what we are going to look at is actually data types in Python. Right, it's very important because when we move forward and we move on to more complex operations in Python, we need to understand what kind of data we are dealing with and how to define a certain data, because if you're not able to do that, then we're not able to classify between the different data sets or data types, and that leads to a lot of errors. And I've seen so many programmers, even advanced programmers, make these kind of mistakes. So that is something which we really want to avoid from the beginning itself. So let's get started. Now to begin with, if you recall from our previous video, for example, there was a data set called a variable is equal to something, say test, right? So what exactly was a variable? A variable is something which can store any information within itself, right? So suppose we define another variable called variable 2. I know I'm not being very creative right now, and we store something as a number in there, for example. Now suppose we want to combine the two, right, and we want to print these out. So let's call that yeah, you guessed it right, variable 3, and let's call it variable uh, plus variable 2, right? And in order to see what we have done out there, we need to print our output. So variable 3 is which will be printed out. Now what do you think is going to happen out there? So obviously we have, if you can see right here, we have letters and we have numbers, right? So this is something which we call a string. If you recall from the previous lesson, anything which has a double quotes on the side of it is a string in Python, and this data set right here is actually an integer. Now the best thing about Replit is this. So you see, as soon as I highlighted this, or as soon as I actually hover on this data type, it actually tells you what kind of a data type it is, right? And it actually gives you some tips and all on how you can actually convert a number or string to an integer, or return 0 if no arguments are given. But this is all for later on. What we're trying to figure out right now is that what will be printed if we try to, well, I don't know why, but if we try to add test and 78. You can write down your answers in the chats below, but what I would like you to do is I'd actually give this a shot and see it for yourself. So if not, we can do it alongside. So let's just go and click run. Yes, we got an error, right? We got an error, and there's a reason we got that error. So let's focus on the error right now. And if you see right here, so this is the command which we gave, and the type error right now is that we can only concatenate, sorry, strings and not integers to strings, right? And this is one of the biggest challenges which coders face, especially the novice or the intermediate coders. They try to integrate different data sets, and what I'm showing you right now is a very simplified version, but when you're doing more complicated statements, when doing if and while loops out there, then it becomes quite difficult to understand, and that where you have made a mistake. So what is happening right now is that this is a string and this is an integer, right? And we cannot combine a string with an integer. So I'll show you how to do this in a while, but before that we need to understand the different data types, right? So the first one is very obvious, is a string, right? So what is a string? Let's say we type hello world, and anything which is within double quotes. So this is not a code basically. Now see what happens if I remove the double quotes from both the sides. Now both the string and hello world are in the same color. Why? Because the program is reading this as a code right now. What happens if we run it? Let's give it a shot. Now it says invalid syntax, right? Because the system is not able to read this code because there's no such command present in the system, right? And that is why it's not able to read it. Now the moment we put double quotes around it, the color changes because it's actually a string now, right? And a string can be stored as part of what we know as a variable, right? So now what we're doing is we have actually stored this text as part of a variable called string. And how do we bring it? So if I run it right now, for example, we won't get an error, but we won't get any output as well. The reason for that is because we haven't really printed out the output on the console, right? So now we have to insert a print statement, and always remember you need to put parentheses in Python 3 whenever you want to print any statement. So now if we click run, we should see hello world. Quite simple. So the first type of data set, one of the most crucial in Python, is a string. So um, any object which has double quotes around it would be considered a string. But can we do that the same way with numbers? You might be thinking, if that's the case, why don't we just say 80, right? And we just put double quotes around it. Let's see what happens. So if we click run, voila, it works. So anything which you put a double quote around can be considered a string, right? So that's the first data type, sorry. The second type of data in Python is integers, right? Integers are once again really important when we talk about them. So any kind of number, 80, 90, 100, whatever, is an integer. And as you can see, very cleverly, Replit has color it in green. So once again, this is a bit different than string, so that we are able to figure out that it's not a string. Now, the critical part about integers is that once again they can also be stored as part of, sorry, okay, the system is, yep. So you can store them as part of variables as well. And if I try to, no, I'm not trying to do that. If I try to print the variable integers this time, we get 100, right? So then the question arises that why do we need to convert integers into strings after all? Because you can see right now, if I had a string before and I print it out, the console does it. If I put an integer out there and I try to print it, the console does it as well. What about mathematical operations? So Python is quite efficient when it comes to mathematical operations, but these can only be carried out on integers or maybe floats, right? And you will just know in a moment what exactly is a float. So what are the basic mathematical operations we are all aware of, right? We can we can add, we can divide stuff, we can subtract stuff, and we can multiply stuff, right? So the same functions are available in Python. And for example, if we want to say multiply 100 by 4, right? So we just put an asterisk in between, and when we print the output, it brings us to 400. But there's another unique feature as part of Python, so which is if we put double asterisks right here, what do you think is going to happen now? Definitely not multiplication, but it's a different form of multiplication which is going to take place. And if we print it out, it actually gives us 100 into 100 into 100 into 100. So that's right. So this is the square root kind of function right here, or to the power function. So if we put 1000, now the result should be 10,000, right? Because it's 100 into 100. So this is 100 squared. Similarly, we can do other functions like division, and if we just put 100 divided by 2, it gives us 50. And we can do multiplication, we can do subtraction, the very basics is 98. So you can do a lot of things with integers when it comes to Python, and honestly, a lot of mathematical operations are needed when you are writing any kind of a program, and you're writing any kind of app. If you want the users to put some sort of an input as part of the package as well, so there also you might need to carry out certain mathematical operations. Even when you're creating online menus, for example, when you have to do certain billings, if you need to create certain tips, etc. So you need to be really comfortable with all these mathematical operations. What I would suggest is that just have a go around, and just try to use subtraction, division, multiplication, square, and all of these operations. And there's one more which I actually forgot. It's called the modulo, right? And this function is actually displayed by using the percentage sign. So what the modulo actually does is that it divides the number by the given number, and it provides the remainder, right? So not the solution, because 100 divided by 2, for example, is 50. But what modulo does is actually provides us with the remainder, which in this case should be 0, right? Similarly, if we try to divide it with a number which does not wholly divide 100, and that's not HOLY, that's the other wholly. If I click here, it gives the remainder 1, right? And why is that? Because, well, 99 divided by 9, and the remainder is 1. So this is the last mathematical operation. Well, not the last, but the majority which you need to know if you're using Python as a beginner or an intermediate. So once again, just have a go around these and try to use them on the console. Try to print out some of these results and be really comfortable with all these mathematical operations. Right. I hope you had a go, but now we're back to our same question, that if we can print out integers, if we can print out strings, and if we can print out integers without double quotes, then why do we actually need to convert integers into strings? I'll just come to that in a moment, but before that I want to show you something else. So let's say if I want to divide 100 by 9, so not the modulo, just simply dividing 100 by 9, we get a result 11 point da, 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 right. So now we are getting results in decimals, and when it comes to Python, any number which is not a whole number but actually consists of decimals in there is called a float. Okay, so any number which has a decimal as part of it is called a float. But this looks really shabby, right? If we want, suppose we create a program where we want people to divide certain numbers, and if the system starts giving us results like this, uh, it doesn't look neat at all. So what do we do about it? So here I introduce to you another very efficient function called round, right? Very simply, basically, it's used to round up the numbers to, say, no decimal point at all, right? So if we define it right here, let's see what happens on the console. It gives us number 11, right? But that's not accurate, right? Because if we divide 100 by 9, we really don't get 11. So what if we want the decimal places in there, but we don't want, say, 7 or 8 decimal places in there? So another feature of the round function is that you can actually define the number of decimal places you actually want as part of the operation, and simply what you have to do is just put a comma after the division and say we want to round it off to 2 decimal places, right? And as you can see here, round a number to a given precision in decimal digits. So once again, replit is very useful. The moment you put any function in there, it actually tells you what you can do with it. So what do you think is going to happen now? Well, I hope you guessed it right. And now the answer which we're going to get is 11.11, because we rounded it off to 2 decimal places. Similarly, if we say 3, we'll get 11.111. And these kind of numbers are actually called floats. Okay. So just to quickly revise, we have gone through strings. So any value which has double quotes around it in Python is going to be considered as a string by Python, and the system will not take it as a code, right? The second type of data set are integers, which are primarily numbers, and the third type of data set are also numbers but with decimal points, which are called float. So the fourth type of data type, my bad, are booleans, right? And what are booleans? If you remember your school days, I'm sure you would have heard this term somewhere. Booleans only consist of 2 values, right? True and false. Okay, but once again, my bad. very important for Python, because a lot of times we have to define certain functions, and in the next lesson actually itself we're going to talk about the if, elif, else statements, which are called conditional statements. And true and false is quite useful when it comes to these kind of statements, right? Even when if you have a lot of consumers on your website who are trying to input certain values in a certain form, for example, then true and false is quite useful, because if you don't want to define what they can put in there or what they cannot put in there, you can simply put a true and false statement for the system to understand that what a person should be entering and what the person should not be entering. So very simply, there's nothing much to define in Booleans, so they only consist of these true values, which is true and false, and we'll see how they're used in the future lessons. Right. The last part of this video, if you remember in the beginning of the lesson, we were trying to add two different variables, which says var1 consists of an integer and var2 consists of a string. And we were trying to create a variable called var3 where we're going to add var1 and var2, right? And if we try to sorry about that. If we try to print bar3 right now, we were facing an error, right? And the error was that basically we cannot concatenate integer and a string. So in that case, what do we do? Because a lot of times we will need where we need to concatenate integers with strings. So for example, suppose we put a number here and we put a string here which says okay, so let's just switch them around and that will become easy. Say I create a string called your age is, right? And here if we put a number, and I'll actually show you in the next lesson how we can change this number, how we can actually ask the user to input something in here, and this value will keep changing every time. It's pretty cool, when it comes to Python. But even now, if we try to print this, it will not print it out, because once again this is a string and this is an integer. So in that case, all we have to do is something known as a string function in Python, alright, and it's defined by let me show you here, str with parentheses, right? And if you see right here, it actually creates a new string object from any given object, right? What does that mean? It can basically convert any data type into a string. So all we need to do is we just need to define it right here. So whatever be the input type right here, we want it to be a string, right? And now if we try to run this statement, it works wonders. Is that easy? Now one thing which I want you to notice here is that I gave a space right after is, right? And there's a reason for that, because if I do like this and if I run this statement, then the 20 is just going to stick to the is, and there's no way to give a space here, because if I try to give a space here, it's still going to print the same, because the code does not understand that this is a space. And because you're converting that integer into a string, so you cannot really put a space right here, and that is why we have to put a blank space here, so that when we print it out on the console, our code looks nice and neat. Okay, now I understand that in a very short span of time we are doing a lot of things, and I might be going a bit too fast for some of you guys out there, but if that is the case, put it down in the comments. I'll try to pace myself better in the next videos, but I'll also put a lot of external links for you so that you can just go and visit them and try to clarify any doubts, and obviously you can write to me as well if you have any doubts as well. Okay, so hopefully this was useful for you. The whole objective of this video was to make you understand the different data types in Python, and I need you to be absolutely clear with these data types, because we're going to use all of them in different capacities when we move further, and if they are not clear to you, it's going to be really difficult for you to understand how to bring different elements together. Okay, so keep revising, keep practicing, and in the next lesson we're going to talk about the raw input function, and we're going to start talking about a bit about conditional statements as well. Okay, that's all for this video. I hope you had fun. See you in the next one.